When the world recognized Palestine, Israel's government responded with one voice and a warning. In a rare display of unity, Israeli leaders from across the political spectrum set aside their differences to present a firm, coordinated front. The message was clear. Israel would not accept what it saw as a unilateral move to legitimize a Palestinian state, especially in the wake of recent violence and ongoing security concerns. This response was not just about politics, it was about national identity, security, and the future of the region. The Israeli government called emergency meetings, convened press conferences, and reached out to allies around the world, urging them to reconsider their positions and warning of serious consequences if the international community continued down this path. The sense of urgency was palpable, as officials emphasized that the recognition of Palestine could undermine years of diplomatic efforts and embolden extremist groups. What happens next? On September 21, 2025, a historic shift took place on the world stage. Countries including the United Kingdom, Canada, and Australia formally recognized the state of Palestine, marking a dramatic turning point in the decades-long Israeli-Palestinian conflict. The announcements came after months of intense diplomatic negotiations, public debates, and mounting pressure from civil society groups and international organizations. In London, Ottawa, and Canberra, government officials cited the urgent need to break the deadlock and revive hopes for a peaceful two-state solution. The move was met with applause in some quarters and fierce criticism in others, as leaders weighed the potential risks and rewards of such a bold step. For many, it was a long overdue acknowledgement of Palestinian aspirations for statehood and self-determination. For others, it was a dangerous gamble that could destabilize the region and derail any chance of meaningful negotiations. France, Monaco, and others quickly followed. Within days, a wave of recognition swept through Europe and beyond, as governments from Paris to Monaco and from Scandinavia to South America issued statements supporting Palestinian statehood. European diplomats convened emergency meetings to coordinate their positions, while international leaders gathered at summits to discuss the implications of this unprecedented diplomatic shift. The momentum was undeniable, as more and more countries joined the growing list of nations recognizing Palestine. For many European leaders, the decision was framed as a moral imperative, a way to reaffirm their commitment to human rights, international law, and the principles of self-determination. Yet, behind the scenes, there were also concerns about the potential fallout. Would this move provoke a backlash from Israel? Could it lead to increased violence on the ground? And what would it mean for the fragile balance of power in the Middle East? Now, over 145 nations support Palestinian statehood, hoping to revive the stalled two-state solution and push for a ceasefire in Gaza. The United Nations General Assembly became a focal point for this new wave of support, with delegates from around the world delivering impassioned speeches and casting decisive votes. The world map of recognition lit up, signaling a dramatic shift in international consensus. In cities across the globe, Palestinian flags were raised at embassies and international events, symbolizing a new chapter in the struggle for recognition. For Palestinians in Gaza and the West Bank, the news brought a mixture of hope and skepticism. Many saw it as a long-awaited validation of their national identity and a potential catalyst for peace. Others worried that the recognition would remain symbolic, with little impact on the ground unless accompanied by concrete steps to end the conflict and address the humanitarian crisis in Gaza. But Israel's response is unusually unified. In a country often divided by fierce political rivalries and ideological differences, the recognition of Palestine brought together leaders from across the spectrum. From the ruling coalition to the opposition, from secular parties to religious factions, there was a rare consensus. The international community's move was seen as a direct challenge to Israel's security and legitimacy. Government officials held joint press conferences, issued coordinated statements, and launched a diplomatic offensive to counter the wave of recognitions. The sense of national solidarity was striking, as Israelis rallied around their leaders and voiced their concerns about the potential consequences of the international community's actions. Leaders from all major parties have condemned the move, calling it a reward for terror after the 2023 Hamas attacks. The memory of those attacks remains fresh in the minds of many Israelis, shaping their perceptions of the current crisis. Politicians from the left, right, and center argued that recognizing Palestine in the aftermath of such violence would only embolden extremist groups and undermine efforts to achieve a lasting peace. They pointed to the ongoing security threats facing Israel, including rocket attacks, border clashes, and the presence of armed factions in Gaza and the West Bank. For many, the international community's decision was seen as a betrayal, a signal that violence could be rewarded with diplomatic gains. This narrative was echoed in the Israeli media, where commentators warned of the dangers of appeasing groups that refused to renounce violence or recognize Israel's right to exist. Prime Minister Netanyahu has gone further, threatening new settlement expansions and even possible annexation of parts of the West Bank. Internationally, reactions are split. Netanyahu's statements sent shockwaves through diplomatic circles as he vowed to take decisive action to protect Israel's interests. The prospect of expanded settlements and annexation raised alarm bells among Israel's allies and adversaries alike. Some warned that such moves could spell the end of the two-state solution and ignite a new wave of violence in the region. Others argued that Israel had no choice but to respond forcefully to what it saw as a coordinated campaign to isolate and delegitimize the Jewish state. The international news media covered these developments extensively, with split screens showing reactions from capitals around the world. The debate over how to respond to Israel's threats became a central issue in diplomatic discussions, with some countries calling for restraint and others backing Israel's right to defend itself. Some European and Arab nations back Palestinian recognition, while others warn Israel not to escalate. The European Union found itself divided, with some member states pushing for a unified stance in support of Palestinian statehood, while others urged caution and dialogue. The Arab League, meanwhile, welcomed the wave of recognitions as a long-overdue step toward justice for the Palestinian people. At the same time, several countries, both in Europe and the Middle East, expressed concern about the risk of further escalation. They called on Israel to refrain from unilateral actions that could inflame tensions and undermine prospects for peace. Protests erupted in Israel as well, with some citizens demanding a more measured response and warning against policies that could lead to international isolation. The diplomatic landscape grew increasingly complex as alliances shifted and new coalitions formed in response to the rapidly changing situation. Meanwhile, protests have erupted across Europe, and the US says it will block Palestinian UN membership. In cities like London, Paris, and Berlin, thousands took to the streets waving Palestinian flags and demanding justice. Demonstrators called on their governments to do more to support Palestinian rights and to pressure Israel to halt settlement expansion. The protests were largely peaceful, but in some cases tensions flared between demonstrators and police. In Washington, the U.S. State Department reiterated its long-standing position. While supporting a two-state solution in principle, the United States would use its veto power to block any attempt to grant Palestine full membership in the United Nations. This stance drew criticism from activists and some lawmakers, who argued that the U.S. was standing in the way of progress. At the United Nations headquarters in New York, diplomats debated the merits of Palestinian statehood, with passionate arguments on both sides of the issue. Analysts warn that Israel's next steps, like annexation, could trigger sanctions and greater instability in the region, making peace even harder to achieve. Economic experts pointed to the risk of international sanctions, which could have a devastating impact on Israel's economy and its relationships with key trading partners. Security analysts warned that unilateral moves could provoke a violent backlash from Palestinian groups and their supporters, leading to renewed fighting and further loss of life. The specter of border tensions loomed large, as neighboring countries watched developments with growing concern. In the region itself, the humanitarian situation remained dire, with destroyed buildings, displaced families, and ongoing unrest. The prospect of a wider conflict cast a shadow over hopes for a negotiated settlement as both sides dug in and the international community struggled to find a way forward. As this story unfolds, the world is watching. News outlets around the globe provided round-the-clock coverage with breaking headlines and live updates from the region. Social media platforms buzzed with commentary, analysis, and first-hand accounts from those on the ground. In living rooms from Tel Aviv to Ramallah, from London to New York, people watched anxiously as events developed in real time. The stakes could not be higher. The future of the Israeli-Palestinian conflict, the stability of the Middle East, and the credibility of the international system all hang in the balance. As leaders weigh their options and ordinary citizens voice their hopes and fears, one thing is clear: the decisions made in the coming days and weeks will shape the course of history for generations to come. For more updates, subscribe and join the conversation below. Share your thoughts, ask questions, and let us know where you stand on this historic moment. Your voice matters, and together we can help shed light on one of the most complex and consequential issues of our time. Stay tuned as we continue to follow this evolving story, bringing you the latest developments, expert analysis, and perspectives from all sides. The world is watching, and so are we.